Welcome to a Tech Moment on Cannabis Tech. I'm your host, Christina Etter. In this podcast, we take just a few minutes to talk about some of the exciting science and technology that's impacting and changing the cannabis and hemp industries. And you know, one of the biggest topics being talked about today is Delta-8 THC. It's absolutely everywhere. We can find these products in gas stations and vape stores. You can buy them online, and they are being promoted, I guess I want to say, as being legal everywhere. And that's maybe a little misleading for a lot of consumers. But much like in the early days of CBD, a lot of these products are mislabeled. You don't know what's in them. You don't know how they've been processed. And unfortunately, it leaves a lot of guesswork to the consumer as to which products are safe to consume, which ones might not be. How can we tell the difference? And a couple of weeks ago, I had the incredible opportunity to sit down for an interview with Josh Swider from Infinite Cal out in California. And I've asked him today to come onto our show and discuss this Delta-8 THC and just exactly what it is that Infinite Cal is finding through the products that they've tested. So welcome to the show, Josh. I am so excited to have this conversation with you today.
Definitely. Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
So let's get started first and get kind of the elephant in the room out of the way and talk about semantics. So just for the sake of this podcast, we're going to talk about the semantics between what's synthesized and what's converted, because that seems to be kind of the sticking point around these products today. You have the one side, the hemp industry, saying, oh, no, they're not synthesized. They're converted cannabinoids. And then, of course, they're still made in the lab. So what is your take, really, as a chemist? What does this process look like? And do you think that these are products that are synthesized, or are they converted?
So, I would gladly like to hear what the difference is between a conversion and a synthesis, because I'd be kind of confused if they're just using them interchangeably. It almost sounds like, but that's my opinion. A synthesis in the chemistry world would be starting from one product A and going to product B. So you're starting from a product that is not what you want, or not your intended analyte, or what you're looking for, Delta-8, and you're converting to that. Conversion, synthesis, there's some kind of chemical process that undergoes to create this new compound. So I'm not 100% sure where the difference would be between the conversion. The World Health Organization, as well as the DEA, have wrote up a few things, and you read both documents, it's kind of clear what they're talking about when talking about synthesis from another cannabinoid to another cannabinoid is illegal. So that's where I kind of get confused, because they're, I guess, using the word converted now, that makes it okay. So look, I'm no lawyer, and I've never claimed to be. I'm just a scientist that read a science paper that understood why they're saying the DEA was saying it illegal, and that's just from my terms, or the way I read it. Is the WHO wrote an article that's pretty science based and science driven. So normally, I would say the average person would not be capable of reading that and determining what actually that paper says. So normally, that was led to the science community, or the chemists primarily. So even an attorney or a lawyer reading that might get lost in it and not know exactly what that means. But as far as what I'm reading, it seems like taking CBD and converting it to Delta-8 would mean that you're doing a synthetic process to create another cannabinoid, which it states in the WHO article that is not allowed.
Correct. Now, can you just briefly, and we don't need to go into deep detail here, but can you just talk a little bit about what that process looks like to convert Delta-8, or to convert CBD into Delta-8?
So that's the interesting thing, is there's a great talk that was just done by Cayman Chemical. It was on a webinar that he talked about this too, and it's an interesting topic, but kind of going backwards, digressing. There's a lot of different ways you can convert it, and there's more efficient ways, and there's different ways of using mostly it's bases and acids you can use. Then you'd want to do some kind of process at the end where you can do a purification process, or like chromatography step or something like that. But the conversion, you can also use catalysts. You can use metal catalysts. There's an endless possibility of things you can do to convert or synthetically make Delta-8 from CBD. I mean, the more efficient they are, normally the more steps they have. And that's kind of one of those things is there one way to do it? No. Is there a more correct way to do it, or a better yield? Yes, and that's that Cayman chemical kind of was talking about, and it's going to lead in probably the rest that we're talking about. There's no conversion that goes one CBD molecule gives me one Delta-8 molecule. That is an impossibility. There is no chemistry out there creates 100% yields or theoreticals. You will create a lot of different analytes at the same time. So that's one of those things. And there's ways to force the reaction. Sorry, I know you said short. There's ways to force the reaction to go better into one thing, Delta-8 or Delta-9 or CBN or THCV. There's a lot of things that actually can go into CBC. I mean, there's a lot of things that we see, and then one thing we actually do see is people just creating 100 different compounds or 1,000 different compounds, and then 80% of it is Delta-8. But then 20% of it is these 1,000 other things that I have no clue what they are. So are they safe to consume? I think that's what we should really look at before we start making Delta-8 at a 80% level or whatever level it wants to be, and then have possible other contaminants in it that we don't know what they are, and to make sure they're safe to consume before they start consuming it.
That's absolutely a fabulous segue into the next part of this podcast that I wanted to kind of get into. You at Infinite Cal have actually tested thousands of samples of Delta-8, and now that you're talking about kind of what your test results have found, what those chromatography results actually looked like, do you want to talk about kind of what you found and what those test results kind of say to you, and kind of why we're having this conversation right now?
So that's one thing we've been doing. I mean, so I'll kind of go back to real quick history. I remember in 2016, 2017, people used to try to create a water clear Delta-9. So like water clear, like there's a clear liquid instead of distillate having yellow color. And a lot of people, what they ended up doing was take their cannabinoid mixture, their THC, Delta-9 THC mixture, and converting it to Delta-8. And then it was seen as trash. Nobody wanted Delta-8. I mean, there's a lot of things in the background getting studied. And I mean, I don't have the articles off the top of my head to cite, but that are talking about Delta-8 is definitely not psychologically not effective to do anything else. It's Delta-9 kind of what people want, so it's just this other cannabinoid that does not have as much therapeutic or effects. And everyone saw it as trash, the Delta-8 material back then. And then CBD kind of got. What happened is CBD became very abundant. So CBD prices over in 3 years went from $10,000 a kilo down to $300 a kilo. Well, now they have a possible starting material to synthetically produce Delta-8 THC. I'll stick with calling it synthetically produced, but that's what I would call it if I was a chemist. And that's where they're starting to get Delta-8. So we started seeing this a couple of years ago as people going ahead and taking their CBD, and they would get bad yield. So what I mean by that is they would start with a kilo of CBD, and then they would only create 50 grams of Delta-8, and that's a bad yield. But then they actually these people would not get high conversion. So what I mean by that is, well, their whole goal is to go to Delta-8, but they create a whole bunch of other stuff, and they only get this small yield of Delta-8. So there's a couple things going on with it. And what we saw back 2 years ago, people would call us and be like, I guarantee it's all Delta-8. I did this conversion, and it's 1-to-1. I read it on YouTube or Twitter or whatever the social media things are. They're reading these things on these, Reddit maybe. And it's not. And that's one thing I always find it intriguing as an analytical chemist to look into these. So I pull chromatograms myself. I get on these phone calls to hear people's opinions. And what you're creating is a lot of side products. I mean, this is chemistry. It's one, you can't just mix two things and get whatever you want just because you want it. The wants, and what you need to do is to do some more work on it. So people have been working on it for a while and getting better at it. So we start to see the less number of side products produced or higher yields. I mean, I remember people used to create 70% Delta-8, 30% Delta-9 you'd start seeing when the people would convert from Delta-9 to Delta-8. But they've kind of changed it by starting with the new material, the CBD, but they are getting a lot of different side products. So what's interesting is we have seen some people that have been doing this for a while. I would say are better at doing this, at taking CBD and going Delta-8. And we've seen stuff up to 90%. From that initial reaction, which is actually impressive, and I commend them as a chemist to doing that kind of thing. But they always have the final step is some kind of chromatography step or some kind of cleanup step. And what I mean by that is, 90% was Delta-8, let's get rid of the other stuff, so then we go with a higher Delta-8 percentage. Or they clean up, and you can tell these things just by looking at a basic chromatogram and a diode array detector. We do full scans and we look at all of it, and it's just always interesting when you start to see I'm going to say a rainforest, or is you're going to see peaks everywhere, just peak, and then the primary peak of Delta-8. But then you see the rest of them, and you're like, well, that's 1% there, that's 3%, and we look for 21 different cannabinoids that we know of, and it doesn't match up with any of those other 21, but there's still 100 of them there. So what are all those compounds? So that's the thing as an analytical chemist, why we came into this whole industry and started out Infinite Chemical Analysis Labs was public safety. Guys, I mean, you got to remember, they're doing a chemistry reaction here, and they're creating byproducts that nobody knows what they are, or no one wants to pay to find out what they are. I'll get a call and be like, hey, just tell me what everything is. I'll give you $50. It's not a $50 job, guys. This is possibly a month or 2, 3 months of work by PhD chemists and labs and spending money on everything else. It's not an easy task, and we've done a lot of this work on the side just to find out for ourselves so we can isolate things. I mean, we did this a long time ago with Delta-8, before we were looking at Delta-8. We started looking at Delta-8 before we could buy standards for Delta-8. So these are those things that's always interesting, is to stay ahead of the game and really look at what you're creating. So once again, we see some people say, hey, I have 100% Delta-8, and they have 10% Delta-8 and a whole bunch of other stuff at very high concentrations, and I have no clue what most of it is. Then we have some people that say they have really clean Delta-8, and you'll have very high percentages of Delta-8, but you still normally have a couple other analytes that sneak through, and you have people doing the chromatography or cleanup steps at the end, where you can see primarily Delta-8. And we've seen all these variations, and that's the thing I always try to just tell people is to be cautious about, is you don't want someone trying to force a reaction going in a beneficial yield of Delta-8, and then they're actually creating high contaminant levels of a metal, if they're using a metal complex to promote the Delta-8 selection or something like that, and they don't know what they're creating. And that's one thing I just try to say, be cautious of, guys. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't like to take a pharmaceutical drug to cure my cancer that some guy made in his garage in a bathtub. I mean, just be careful, guys. That's all I would say.
Right. And I think that is, at least in my opinion, that's something that kind of terrifies me. I don't want to say it like that. I mean, it's one of those things. I understand, and I mean, we have to look at this from the illegal drug market. I understand that there are a lot of people out there that don't have a concern about the product that they're putting in their body as long as it delivers a particular effect. I know that those people exist, but I do believe that there is a large portion of us, especially in this industry, that are very, very concerned about the things that we're putting into our body. We're concerned about how these products are being produced. We like the fact that regulation is being implemented on the cannabis industry because it helps reduce the amount of contaminants that we are exposed to when we're using a plant-based medicine. And so when I hear that, and I hear that men get involved, and I don't mean men as in a sex thing, but humans. When humans start to get involved and meddle with things, you don't always know what that meddling can cause. Yeah, it might be creating the same cannabinoid, which I absolutely believe that the cannabinoid itself probably has some potential somewhere. But I think we need to be very, very conscientious of how we're producing that cannabinoid. And like we talked about in our first interview, I fear that producer that you talk about that sees the video on YouTube or reads the description in Reddit about how to do this and then goes out to their Morton building and starts doing these chemistry tasks that we really don't understand. And that for me is where the whole consumer safety aspect of it really comes into play. It's one thing to extract a cannabinoid directly from the plant that's not been touched by human hands, but then it's another thing to add in all of these extra chemicals to try to produce something different. And you know, I think we learned too in the cannabis industry early on when we started finding that there were contaminants in the concentrates, and you know, there were residual pesticides, or there might have been residual solvents, and there were all of these things that started coming out. You know, I'm thinking back to the early days here in Denver where, you know, the 2015 when things started kind of getting blown up in that area. But we learned and we made those changes, and producers started being held to higher accountability. And I think that's what needs to happen here. I'm not against Delta-8 in particular. I'm against the unknowns of how it's being produced. Does that make sense?
I completely agree with that, and I want to make a stance. Like, I'm not saying I'm against this one cannabinoid or anything like that, or any cannabinoid in particular, or any chemical. I'm trying to say just I think people should be wary. And the thing that kind of gets scary, kind of what you brought up in the beginning, is this is being sold on shelves. If I can go buy, so like kind of we took this to, okay, you know, someone using narcotics that were made, you know, well, okay, you have to go buy that from a drug dealer. You can't go buy that at 7-Eleven, correct? You everyone understand what I'm saying? It's a big difference. You get a sense of security when you're going to a store or even the cannabis store and buying this thing, that it's going to be okay and safe. And if it's not undergoing the same regulations, then we definitely should take that into account. I mean, I think there's some stuff that should be done publicly by the government if they want to step in and say it's to regulate it or anything like that, or to make the stance on if it's legal or illegal to produce. I don't think people will be happy with that. We're working on a DEA license for our testing lab, and I'm going to have some conversations with some DEA members about this, and I don't think their opinion is going to match some others. But I mean, that's the thing too, and this is the other part. I mean, it's kind of trash, or like kind of throwing salt on my own industry, but I mean, I can tell you this: I test the same sample as other people test. They'll get 100% Delta-8, but then if you go look at it, they're only 70% Delta-8, and then you can see so many other peaks. How come when I run it, I see that sample, but when they run it, they see 100%? And then the producers, I don't know if I've spent more time on the phone this last year with producers of Delta-8 than anyone else in the world, explaining just general chemistry and the fact that you're never going to get 100% yields. And, well, this guy tells me I get 100% and you don't. Well, okay, then I'll send him my chromatogram and be like, tell me what all those other peaks are. Tell them what they add up to then. They have to be something. We can't ignore them. They're real things. And it just creates this back and forth. And then a lot of times with some of the companies that maybe aren't doing the best job at looking out for public safety, they're like, well, I'm just going to go with this guy. He says 100%. I'm going to give everyone a sense of security that this lab said it's 100% Delta-8. So, and that's one thing. I mean, we're ethics over profits. We're not here to make money and to everything. We're here for public safety and everything else. And that's one of the things. We have companies actually that are doing a hell of a job cleaning that stuff up and making sure they're not getting minimized side products and understanding what the side products are. And we're more than willing to help work on that kind of stuff as well.
Absolutely. And, you know, you bring up a good point there too, is that these are being sold in stores and these are being produced by companies. And so the question that really kind of lingers in my mind is, who's going to be the company that produces the product that trips the trigger? You know, so like we talked about on the other interview in 2019, we had the vitamin E vape crisis where people started getting sick from vape cartridges, and it really brought a lot of scrutiny into the industry. It brought a lot of negative headlines into the industry, and I fear poor chemistry in the production of Delta-8 THC causing the same thing at some point. And unfortunately, like you said, we have this opportunity to show integrity. We have this opportunity to do things right and put ethics before profits. But unfortunately, with, like you said, the decline in the price of CBD, people are kind of scrambling. They're not getting the returns that they wanted. And so Delta-8 kind of produces a temptation, I think, to increase that bottom line. And that That disappoints me more than anything about the cannabis industry, is because I think that that's what we tried to avoid. I mean, that's why a lot of us came to the cannabis industry, to avoid pharmaceuticals and kind of the shadiness that was going on there with the opiate epidemic. And now we get into this selling a product just for profit without really knowing what's in it. Does it make it any better because it's hemp? I don't think it does. And so that's kind of my ethical dilemma with what's going on right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I know cannabis is used a lot of times as an alternative to a lot of the products, and it does a great job. It's just now we're synthetically modifying or converting, whatever we want to call it, in doing a chemistry. So one thing that pharmaceutical companies look at is what's happening when they create a product, what their side products are they dangerous? So until we can start looking at everything as a big picture and not just saying, hey, I mostly created this, now I can sell it, we should really look into it, because we're no longer taking a plant and consuming that plant when these are undergoing these processes. We're taking a hemp plant and doing whatever we want to call it to create a different compound. And there's going to be some things that happen. It doesn't seem like right now, I mean, I have not heard of any horrible negative effects for it, but I believe we're just in the beginning. I mean, the vitamin E acetate thing, I think we saw vitamin E acetate in 2017, because people were buying kilos of distillate and being like, oh, this guy will sell it to me for half the price of this guy, and it was really just 70% vitamin E acetate, and then it would only be 30% Delta-9 THC, and then people would ask us, what is it? And as chemists, analytical chemists, and other chemists in my facility, we all are curious. So we don't even, we just take that material and find out. We can run full scan tests. We have access to every kind of type of analytical equipment that we would ever need to figure these things out. And we told people it was vitamin acetate years beforehand. We didn't realize how bad it would be. People would be like, should I sell that? And we're like, no, you shouldn't. You shouldn't consume vitamin acetate. What happens when you inhale it? And then they're like, okay, true, yeah, we're going to destroy it. I hope they destroyed it, but the thing is, it took, I would say, a year or two before we saw that vape scare stuff. Before I saw vitamin E acetate and determined people were doing that. So people making this Delta-8 stuff, is it safe? I don't know. Could it take a year or two before something comes about this? Sure. It's just all about production methods, and then someone trying to get a cheaper price or make more of a dollar. And that's kind of why Delta-9, even the same thing. They wanted to make more of a dollar on their material, so let's just dilute it with 20% vitamin E acetate. And we saw what happened with that. So what happens with Delta-8? Someone potentially is going to be trying to make more of a dollar. But I mean, there is people out there doing it right, and I'm not trying to pick on the industry or one classic thing or clients or anything. There are people out there doing it right, but someone needs to really check and make sure we're doing this correctly, or there needs to be something being done. Not just saying anyone can make it and anyone can sell it and we can sell it at stores or wherever else without having some kind of regulatory compliance to make sure it's going to be safe for human consumption.
Absolutely. And that's such a great point to make too, is that the regulations really are here to protect people and to protect us from, the days of the old snake oil salesmen and all of these places that were producing things for people to consume and not really giving them the full idea of what's really in that product. And I just think that that's so important. And unfortunately, right now, I think it's really difficult for consumers to be able to tell the good from the bad. Is there any way for consumers to tell the difference?
So that's the thing. It's hard, but it's possible, and it's a lot of back end work. So it's finding a company that is more reputable by looking into the company. Make sure they have a website. Make sure you can contact them. If you made a complaint about your product, does it go to an empty mailbox that no one looks at? Is there someone that's answering the phone if you said I had a problem with the product? You can look at the testing results. I mean, there are trusted testing labs. I think if Chemical Analysis Labs is a trusted chemistry lab. I can tell you this: if you look up the lab that they tested at and the lab doesn't have a website, or it's a hole in a wall, or just like a blank website, you can see these things. Or you call the number and no one answers, and during regular business hours, it's probably a problem. I can guarantee you, if someone will answer my phone from 5 in the morning till 11 at night. So that not me, I'm saying my business phones, So those are those things you look for. And that's one thing we've been seeing with these Delta-8 things is we get certificates of analysis all the time. Check those certificate analysis. I mean, that's what consumers should be doing, right? Ask them for it. Oh, we don't have one. Well, okay, you didn't test it. You didn't test it for safety. Maybe I don't want to consume a product, but you will find companies out there that do. I am a third-party testing lab. Sadly, I will not promote my clients that are doing things right because I am a third-party testing lab. I am not here to make someone money. I think that's what a lot of this industry and the cannabis testing industry has gotten lost in, is they promote their clients. I mean, I will not do that just because it's not my job, But if you ask for their COA and you see my name and that we're out here doing this stuff, right? Traceable COAs. I mean, ours have QR codes on them. You can take a picture of the QR code and they'll bring you up to our secure website where to have the actual results. I've seen a million times the QR codes removed and the 10% Delta-8 became 100% Delta-8 because they edited a piece of paper. That's very possible. It's not impossible to do. I mean, anyone can edit a PDF. One other thing, just make sure it matches. I mean, we've seen people put 100% Delta-8 on it, and then you take a picture of the QR code, and it goes and says 5% Delta-8. I mean, that's one of those things, is just doing a little bit of due diligence. I mean, even in the cannabis industry, I feel it can be a little difficult to get that too. I've walked into cannabis retailers and asked, can I see the COA for this product? And then the bud tender or whoever's selling it says, what's a COA? And I'm like, that's alarming. You should be able to, as a consumer, request these things. I mean, even at that, as a consumer level, there are allowable limits of contaminants in all of the material. It is allowable. There's action levels that are determined by where they pull it. It's still being figured out, but action levels pulled out of other industries saying, hey, I can consume this much pyrethrin. Okay, well, I'm a consumer. I don't want to consume any pyrethrin. Well, I could look at the COA and determine if it has any in there. And you should be doing this as a cannabis consumer or a hemp consumer. I mean, the client or the end users or the end purchasers or the people driving it. If you guys start asking for, hey, I want to see heavy metal analysis on my Delta-8, or I want to see pesticides on my Delta-8 to make sure I'm not getting anything dirty, they would need to start doing that. But until the call for safe products by the consumer is being done to the manufacturers, it's not going to be done. Even the hemp industry, it concerns me that we're this far in and this long in and we still don't have safety testing required in the hemp industry. Sure, we're getting there, but it's a long way from being there. They test for potency. Well, I mean, what happens if it has a lot of pesticides on it? Is that okay for everyone to consume? The answer is no, and everyone would agree with that. Everyone in that regulatory body would, but we've only stamped potency testing on this stuff to make sure it's not hot or have Delta-9 on it. Well, let's think as a community that this is not probably the way we should do, and the consumers, you guys are the ones to potentially drive the market to have this stuff tested. I'm not doing a ploy to gain profit margins or share or anything like that. It's the sole reason why we came in this industry is public safety. Let's not have a vape scare type situation happening with Delta-8 because no one's thinking about it or anything like that. I mean, we don't want to see people smoking hemp product in 10 years that, smoked this stuff and no regulation ever came and they're starting to get cancer and dying from because they smoked hemp or consumed hemp products, but we're not safety compliance testing it. These are all done on agricultural crops and everything else that we're using in the United States, but for some reason we're neglecting it being done for this crop. Because we haven't built enough regulations because it was technically illegal 2 years ago. One of those things.
Yes, absolutely. And it's just such a complex industry too. I think that that's something that we're starting to figure out, that growing hemp, growing cannabis, it's a lot more complex than just throwing some seeds in the ground and waiting for a plant to come up. So I think too that as we start to learn more about how the plant grows and how it interacts with the human body and just the basic processes around creating these products, I think are going to really educate a lot of us in terms of of consumer knowledge in these products. I think it's going to be fascinating kind of how this evolves over the next several years, and as the consumer evolves, because the more we talk about things like this and the more that we start to let consumers in on some of those back end processes, some of the technologies and things that you and I see on a regular basis because we work in the industry, the regular consumer out there doesn't really understand that. And so I think as we start to get some of this information out there, start to educate everyone on how things are actually processed, I'm hoping that that kind of knowledge just starts to proliferate and things get better as we go along. But it is just kind of a wild, wild west world out there right now with a lot of these cannabinoids and the processes that are being done to get them out there. So it's definitely interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what the DEA does. Just everything is around this particular process, I think, is really going to come into question within the next year or so.
Yep, 100% agree. I think it'll be very interesting, and I mean, everyone out there that's a producer and saying, hey, my lawyer tells me, and I'm not claiming bad about lawyers, my lawyer tells me I'm allowed to do this. Well, my lawyer would too if he's standing to make millions of dollars potentially protecting me later. I mean, you read the things yourself, make your own determinations. If you believe it, then go for it. Just be on the right end of the spectrum, trying to be making this as the most safe product your consumers can use.
Absolutely. Well, and thanks to you too for what you do, because like you said, you're a third party tester. You're not going to give out the names of those producers that are doing things right. But you do that to gain the integrity, to let people know that you're not just helping other companies produce a dollar. And I think that's absolutely a great way to do your business and to build that trust in the industry and trust with the consumer too, to know that you're not out there working to pad the pockets of the producers. You're there to help keep consumers safe. And so we absolutely appreciate the work that you do. I appreciate you coming on and talking about this because, like I said, I just feel like this is kind of a hot topic right now. And I know that there's a lot of discord or kind of divide in the industry around Delta-8 right now. But at the same time, these are important conversations that we need to have in order to help build that integrity into the industry and keep these processes where they're supposed to be. Like you said, we don't want dirty bathtub hemp in our industry.
Definitely. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks again, Josh. Thank you for coming on.